So, today we're going to be discussing the role of nationalism and the unification of countries throughout Europe in the middle of the 19th century. So, Europe, going back as far as really the Middle Ages, is dominated by European empires, right? So you have the Spanish Empire that unifies, obviously, in what is today Spain, and then has a global empire beginning in the 1500s. You have England and ultimately Britain, United Kingdom. You have um, you have France, and then the empire there, and you have the Austro-Hungarian Empire or the Austrian Empire, and then you have the different German connections, and you have all of these massive empires that are dominating Europe. However, by the 1800s, as we talked about earlier, there's this growing desire for nationalism within Europe. There is a push, there is a passion to unite the people of your country. And that really starts, as I said last time, with the rise of Napoleon and the spread of nationalism as a result of the French Revolution. And if you look at the map of Europe, or look at a map of Europe, you'll see that there's many different nation groups within Europe. Now, when we talk about nation groups, we're talking about things like where you have, so the black lines here are modern, or I should say contemporary um, borders, right? So you have France, you have the different sort of pieces within France. You have you have Spain, you have Portugal, you have all of the different boundaries, but then overlaid on that are color coded nation groups, right? So Polish people are not really confined to just what is Poland. It goes into parts of Germany. Then you have Czechs, you have Slovaks, you have Austrians, you have Italians going into Austria. You have all of these different groups of people. And when you think about these larger empires that are taking over these other communities, it makes people who are living there, it makes the Germans ask, well, why, if we're German or if we're Austrian, why do we have Italians living in here? Why, if we're Italian, why are we living in Austria? So it begins to ask that question. That's all even more exacerbated by the fact that Napoleon dominates so much of Europe in the early 1800s. When Napoleon conquers parts of Germany and then takes more control over Germany or gets a lot of influence in Austria, people begin to ask the question, well, why are we going to let this French person come in and have control over portions of us? And that, again, there's sort of insult to insult to insult is made even worse again after the Congress of Vienna. If you remember, the Congress of Vienna is this meeting held in 1815-16 where the powers of Europe, Austria, Italy, France, Britain, Spain, and Germany, come together and they decide how we're going to resettle Europe in the wake of the Napoleonic conquests. And what is decided is basically rewind the clock, right? Reinstate these empires, make them strong and powerful, and make sure that they are bordered by stronger and powerful groups, and everything will be great. So the first as a result of this, you have the rise of Italian and German unification in particular as two very important examples of unification throughout Europe. Italy has always been a very closely related country. People within the Italian peninsula all speak Italian. They're predominantly Catholic. However, the one big piece here is that the Italian peninsula is influenced by a lot of other groups of people. There is influence within Italy from Spain. There's influence in Italy, particularly in northern Italy, from the Austrians, the Germans up here, and the French over here on the west coast. Rome is obviously its own beast, right? It's the papal states. It's dominated by the Catholic Church. But then within southern Spain, Naples, you have a lot of influence from Spain, and so on. So people people who are sort of Italian nationalists don't want Italy to continue to be influenced by these outsiders, by these non-Italians. So beginning in the early 1820s with people that we already know about, like Giuseppe Mazzini, you have the beginning of a group called the Young Italians. And they start to focus on the idea of risorgimento. Risorgimento is this idea of resurging Italian culture, right? And by Italian culture, we don't necessarily mean sort of stereotypical Italian culture. We're talking about sort of looking back, right? Looking back at ancient Rome, right? Rome, the Roman Empire, the greatness of the way that the country used to be, and it's a way to sort of connect people together in this in their Italianness. They think about Petrarch, right, who is the first person to have written a book in an Italian dialect. So when it comes to 1848, there are small revolutions that pop up throughout Italy to try and get the people, the others out, right? The Austrians out, the French out. And it is unsuccessful in some places, it is more successful in others. But the first place to become independent is a place called Sardinia. Sardinia is close to France. It is also an island, right? So it's two parts, right? And when they received their independence from France in 1849, they are established as sort of this stronger power, and they are sort of purely Italian. And it's a way for them to identify themselves as the sort of leaders of independence. The person who sees this as a desire is a guy named Count Camille Cavour. Now, Cavour is from Sardinia. He's from the island of Sardinia. And he is the chancellor of the island underneath the king, King Victor Emmanuel. And his goal is to try and establish a strong Sardinia within a strong Italy. He wants there to be a parliamentary system. He wants, most importantly, Italy to be industrialized. By 1848, the Industrial Revolution is going on throughout Europe. And he sees that the only way for Italy to really compete is by having more industrialization. So I'm not going to bog down in details here, but the important thing to know here is Garibaldi. Giuseppe Garibaldi is another one of these Italian nationalists following in the footsteps of Giuseppe Mazzini. And he has the idea that he's going to come together with a group of red shirts who are his sort of vigilante groups. They're going to start in Sicily and they're going to march north through Italy and unify the country. Now, this makes Count Camille Cavour from Sardinia nervous. So they come together, Garibaldi and Mazzini, Garibaldi and Cavour, and they sit down and they say, look, we both want the same thing. We want a unified Italy. Garibaldi says, I want a republic. I don't want monarchy. I don't want aristocracy. I don't want kings. Camille Cavour, who's a count and works for the Victor Emmanuel, says, we want a monarchy. You need a monarchy. You need legitimacy. So what they do is they hatch an agreement. And the agreement says, we'll keep the king, but he's constitutional monarchy. He has limits to his power. And that happens in 1861. 1861, Italy becomes unified under Garibaldi and Camille Cavour and Victor Emmanuel. Victor Emmanuel becomes the first king of a united Italy. 10 years later, 1871, they add Rome with the Papal States, and they give the Pope Vatican City, but it's a way for them to, it's the beginning of that unification. Germany is also another country that becomes unified at this same period. Germany looks like this on the eve of its unification. It is called the German Confederation, And it is basically a group of German-speaking peoples who are united together, but they are not a country. They are not a nation state. They have a trade zone, they're called the Zollverein, a free trade zone. They have a common language, but there is uh, Württemberg, there's Bavaria, there's Baden, there's Hessen, there's Thuringia, there's Saxony, there's Prussia. They're all different little kingdoms or principalities, not united. As I said, the Zollverein is the first really attempt for them to come together and begin a path towards unification. The Zollverein is a trade agreement, free trade agreement, where Germans, as long as you're within the Zollverein, you can trade across these different communities tax-free, makes a common currency, common units of measure, right? So if I'm trading in pounds and you're trading in kilograms, that makes trade a little tough. But if we all agree to the same standard weights, it opens up trade. One of the sort of benefits, I think, for the liberals at least, was that this hurt the Junkers, or I should say the Junkers. The Junkers were German aristocrats. They owned the land, and this hurt them because it means that instead of buying maybe more expensive goods in my neighborhood, I can sort of shop around for prices, and maybe if I live in Bavaria, it's cheaper to buy something from Prussia. So it hurts the business, and it sort of takes away powers from the Junkers, and that's sort of a liberal perspective at least. In 1848, we know this already, that there's something called the Frankfurt Assembly or the Frankfurt Conference. And at this meeting, they come together in the city of Frankfurt. They draw up a constitution, and they offer the constitution to Frederick William. Now, Frederick William of Prussia, Prussia, if you look at this map, Prussia is the largest German state and also the most powerful German state. They offer him the constitution, but he says, I do not want the constitution from the gutters, right? He doesn't want to accept that he was going to have a limit on his power. The person who is really important to this unification is a guy named Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck is the Chancellor of Germany, and he practices what we call in history or in poli-sci, we call this realpolitik. It's a French word, realpolitik. Realpolitik is a type of political philosophy where you are pragmatic. You don't sort of think about guiding historical ideas or policy philosophy. You do what is best to get the goals that you want. And Bismarck, he knows that people want, he doesn't necessarily care about religion too much, right? But he knows people care about religion. So what he wants is, he wants a religious religious tolerance, right? To give sort of, to encourage people to join. He offers some concessions to get bigger plans through. The other thing that the Germans do is they have war. They have two wars in the 1760s with Denmark and another with Austria to try and get more to get more territory and get more nationalism. But the thing that really helps here is the Franco-Prussian War. France, if you remember, is this sort of perennial problem, right? People remember Napoleon, people remember the big problems that happened in the 18 teens. So the Germans have forever thought of themselves as, we are not French. And one of the things that makes us all German is that we are not French. So Bismarck takes a telegram, he adulterates it, and he makes it seem like the French are that the Germans are dissing the French. So then what happens is the French have to declare war. War happens, and we call this the Franco-Prussian War, 1870-71. And what happens as a result? Because the Germans see themselves as not French, they get into the war. The Germans ultimately win the war. It's about a 10-month battle. And as a result, after this, the Germans unify into a country. So the unification in the 1800s is a direct result of the nationalism born out of the French Revolution.